Several years ago, after I had just tucked my daughter into bed, there was a knock at the door, likely around 9 p.m. When I opened it, I found two police officers standing there, stating they needed to speak with me. I replied, "Go ahead." They gestured to come inside, but I remained in place and asked what it was about. One officer said, "We've received a complaint. Someone you know has filed for a domestic violence order, DVO, against you." He handed me a piece of paper saying, "Read this." After looking it over, I was still confused. Apparently, someone had been persistently ringing a woman's doorbell and attempting to enter her apartment both day and night. One officer added, "You were just there earlier tonight." I responded, "Really? When?" The other officer replied, "About half an hour ago." I couldn't help but laugh. I didn't own a car, the address was far away by bus, I didn't know the woman, and I had been with my daughter all evening. I explained this to the officers. They exchanged a glance and bid me goodnight before leaving, clearly skeptical of the situation. Later, it emerged that the woman was a friend of my ex-partner who was attempting to gain custody of our daughter after failing to attend the custody hearing, a situation I've discussed elsewhere on Quora. Both my ex and her friend were charged with filing a false complaint and placed on good behavior bonds. At one point, I was renting an apartment in the center of town. I had grown up with the chief of police, and we had remained close friends. One afternoon, he and a few officers dropped by my place for lunch. My next-door neighbor, a teacher, was very sensitive to noise and often complained about disturbances. That day, she called the police, reporting a loud party at my apartment. It was amusing when about 5 police radios buzzed with the report of the noisy gathering at my address, while most of the police force was sitting in my apartment, enjoying lunch. I have a story of my own. In the year 2000, my youngest son celebrated his 6th birthday with family and a few neighbors. We had about 8 adults and 5 children in attendance around 2 p.m. At the time, we lived in Salem, MA, famously known as Witch City because of the Salem witch trials. My son, the youngest of 3 boys, loved music and singing. A friend of mine who ran a karaoke business offered to provide entertainment for the party. It was a beautiful spring day, and everyone was having a great time outside. The kids were singing, and even a couple of adults joined in. Around 3 p.m., my 72-year-old mother pointed out 3 police officers standing in my neighbor's driveway, observing the children. I approached the officers and offered them food and drinks, but they explained they were there on official business. They informed me that someone had called to report a loud party with heavy alcohol consumption and intoxicated individuals. I couldn't help but laugh. It was a 6-year-old's birthday party on a sunny Saturday afternoon, and there wasn't a single drop of alcohol present. After looking around, the officers realized the complaint was unfounded and joined us for a laugh. One even sang karaoke. To this day, we tease my son about how his 6th birthday party was raided by the police. I was asleep in my bed at 2 a.m. when I was abruptly awakened by a loud crash and shouting. Initially, I thought a car had smashed into our house, as we live on a sharp curve where such accidents are possible. Instead, it was a group of 7 or 8 police officers storming in with weapons drawn and full tactical gear. It took about 10 minutes for them to search the house and explain their presence. They told me they had received a call from a concerned citizen claiming I was in a violent rage and physically assaulting my daughter. The officers quickly realized that nothing of the sort was happening and left. Later, I discovered the call had come from the mother of a friend my daughter had spent time with after skipping school. This woman had supplied alcohol and marijuana to the kids and was worried I would find out, so she made false accusations against me and 2 other parents to cover her tracks. Her actions led to her losing custody of her children. She spiraled into substance abuse, lost her job, was abandoned by her boyfriend, and eventually evicted. Despite all this, she continues to blame everyone else for her misfortune. Someone reported me to the police claiming I had written an anonymous erotic letter sent to them. I am happily married and have absolutely no interest in this man, who is also married. Before the police visit, his wife had messaged me on Facebook with a photo of the letter, angrily demanding I stay away from her husband. I had no clue why they believed I wrote it, as I barely knew the man and the only recent interaction we had was a text argument. They threatened to involve the police and I laughed it off, assuming they wouldn't bother investigating a harmless love letter. However, I was shocked when officers arrived at my door wanting to discuss the matter. I explained I hadn't written the letter and had no idea why I was being blamed. One officer mentioned he could collect fingerprints if necessary. While this conversation was happening, the officer received a call on his radio asking him to respond to an emergency, which he declined. It was astonishing to think someone's emergency was being ignored because the police were prioritizing this absurd situation. Let me share my experience. To preface, I am profoundly deaf and remove my cochlear implant, CI, and hearing aid when I sleep, leaving me completely unable to hear. I rely on an alarm clock called a sonic bomb, which some might recognize. On the night before the incident, during the start of a heat wave, I left my bedroom windows open. I don't recall setting my alarm, but the next morning I woke naturally around 10 a.m. to see my doorbell alert light, a red light connected to the doorbell in each room, flashing. Peeking through my curtains, I saw a police van with 6 officers outside, one holding a battering ram. I shouted that I'd be downstairs shortly, put on my CI and hearing aid, and suddenly realized my sonic bomb alarm was blaring. It was set to audible rather than vibrate. When I opened the door, I explained my deafness. An irritated neighbor revealed they thought I had died because the alarm had been ringing for 2 hours. My deaf friends and family laughed when I told them, joking, "Classic deaf problems." Years ago, while living in rural Texas, my housemates decided to keep chickens for fun. Eventually, they lost interest, so I took responsibility for processing the chickens for food, doing it in the front yard for better lighting. A neighbor, however, called the police, claiming I was performing satanic rituals. This was rural Texas with no homeowner associations and sprawling properties bordered by the piney woods. Ironically, these same neighbors claimed to come from farming backgrounds, yet they failed to recognize the simple act of processing chickens and mistook it for something sinister. My son's father called the police on me 5 times in 1 week in an attempt to create a case to modify our custody arrangement. His complaints ranged from me not dressing our 9-month-old son cute enough to expired vehicle tags, which were 3 months overdue, non-existent insurance, I had valid coverage, and not responding to his texts within 4 minutes. On the first night, officers conducted a wellness check and found my son in perfect health, sleeping peacefully in his crib. Dissatisfied with the outcome, he repeated this every day that week. Eventually, the police stopped visiting my home and began calling instead. They even saw me driving with my expired tags while dropping my children off at school, but never pulled me over, instead giving friendly waves. One officer summed it up best, saying, "I don't think he understands how custody or wellness checks work." This didn't happen to me, but to my parents. I learned to swim before I could even walk, as we lived in South Florida, where water is everywhere. My parents would take me to the beach, stand about 15 feet apart in the water, and toss me between them. I would squeal with joy as I hit the water and swam to the other parent. However, someone decided to report them, claiming they were trying to drown me. This was over 50 years ago, long before cell phones, 911, or touch-tone dialing. The person had to locate a phone, look up the number, and manually dial it, or involve an operator. When the officer arrived, he waded out to my parents in the water, laughed, and explained the complaint. My parents found it amusing and continued to enjoy the day. After retiring from a major police department, I took a job as an officer at a local university, which had a busy hospital. Younger officers disliked working at the hospital since it required staying at a fixed post rather than patrolling. One evening, a nurse summoned me to address an issue, but after listening, I informed her that it wasn't a matter for the police, and there was nothing I could do. She seemed shocked and, in front of me, called 911 to report the same issue, claiming I was unhelpful. I calmly waited, confident in my decision, and mentioned that I was a recent retiree from the very department she was calling. She smirked, possibly thinking I was inexperienced. When city officers arrived, she repeated the story, and they confirmed it was not a police matter before leaving. I was taken aback that she called 911 right in front of me, as if trying to escalate the situation, but felt validated when the officers supported my decision. Moving forward, I made a mental note to handle interactions with her carefully,